Please welcome back Colorado Christian University's own Legacy Quartet.
You place your hand upon his Bible when you swear to tell the truth. His name is on our greatest monuments, and all your money too. And when we pledge allegiance, there's no doubt where we stand. There's no separation, we're one nation under him. In God we still trust. Here in America, he's the one we turn to every time the going gets rough. He is the source of all our strength, the one who watches over us. Here in America, in God we still trust. Now there are those among us who want to push him out and erase his name from everything this country's all about. From the schoolhouse to the courthouse, they're silencing his word. And now it's time for all believers to make our voices heard. In God we still trust. Here in America, he's the one we turn to every time the going gets rough. He is the source of all our strength, the one who watches over us. Here in America, in God we still trust. Here in America, here in America, in God we still trust. Here in America, in God we still trust. Right here in America, in God we trust. America, America, God shed his grace on thee and crown thy good with brotherhood. From sea to shining sea. Oh, beautiful for heroes proved in liberty.
and strife, who more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. America, America, America.
Everyone, please welcome Jeff Hunt, Maggie Tynan, and Sheriff Bill Elder.
All right, good evening. This is going to be a special night as we honor and recognize our first responders and military. So we're going to be going through lots of different things, but if you hear the branch that you're called from, we're going to want you to stand a little bit later. But before we begin, we're going to welcome the Color Guard, and they'll be announced now.
Ladies and gentlemen, this evening the colors will be presented by the Colorado State Champion Valkyrie Cadet Squadron Honor Guard of the Civil Air Patrol, U.S. Air Force Auxiliary, under the command of Majors David Pershing and Jeff Caldwell. Cadets presenting the colors are Cadet Lieutenant Colonel Kyle Vestiga, Cadet Captain Louis Stein, Cadet First Lieutenant Avrami Oleski, and Cadet Master Sergeant Gabriel Venegas.
Please stand as we present the colors. Present horse.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag
We're going to be honoring our military today, our veterans, and our first responders. To help honor the first responders, please welcome Bill Elder, Sheriff from El Paso County, and John Cook, State Senator. Thank you.
Good evening, conservatives. Have a seat. We're going to make you stand back up here in a minute. Thanks for being here. I'm honored to stand up here with Senator Cook, a former sheriff himself, to honor those who stand the thin blue line.
We would like to thank you, as also the Western Conservative Summit and Colorado Christian University, thank all those in law enforcement who give up and potentially could lay down their lives for all of us. And we also want to thank and honor all first responders.
So if you're a member of law enforcement, firefighter, or emergency responders, please stand to be recognized.
Thank you so much for your service. We also want to recognize two members of the veterans of World War II that are with us this evening that will be coming out now. Go ahead. To my right is Robert Hunt, my grandfather. This is hard for me because not only do I appreciate the service that he's given to our country, but he is the faith leader of our family, the man whose faith and commitment to Jesus Christ has led to my own faith and to the faith of many others in our family. Robert Hunt served on Centennial Island as a radar mechanic for the B-29 Flying Fortress. Centennial Island is where the Enola Gay took off to bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Grandpa, thank you for everything.
Thank you. Amen. You're a good boy.
To my left is Don Whipple, who Hoorah is right. At the age of 17, joined the 5th Marine Division. He was sent to Iwo Jima and stormed the beaches as part of the second wave to hit that island. Even though he was injured in the leg, he fought on, spending 36 days in battle on Iwo Jima. He was awarded a Purple Heart for his injuries. After his service, he moved to Colorado and graduated from Colorado Christian University with a degree in Bible studies and history in 1955. Friends, let's give another round of applause to these brave men whose battles have laid the foundation for us to enjoy the freedoms we enjoy today. God bless you, gentlemen. Thank you so much.
As we continue our tribute to the armed forces, please follow along with the words on the screen and sing with us as we sing the special songs for each branch of our service. As your song is being sung, I invite you please to stand and remain standing through the end of the piece. Here we go. The Army is up first.
Over hill, over dale, we will hit the dusty trail, and those caissons go rolling along. In and out, hear them shout, counter-marching all about, and those caissons go rolling along. For it's high, high he, the field artillery. Count out your numbers loud and strong. 2, 3, 4, up, 2, 3. For wherever you go, you will always know that those caissons go rolling along.
And the Navy.
Anchors away, my boys, anchors away. Farewell to foreign shores, we sail at break of day. Through our last night ashore, hail to the foam. Until we meet once more, here's wishing you a happy voyage home.
And the Coast Guard.
We're always ready for the call. We place our trust in thee. Through howling gale and shot and shell to win our victory. Semper Paratus is our guide, our pledge, our motto too. We're always ready to or die. I, Coast Guard, we fight for you.
The Air Force.
Off we go into the wild blue yonder, climbing high into the sun. Here they come, zooming to meet our thunder. At him, boys, give her the gun. Down we dive, spouting our flame from under. Off with one terrible roar. We live in fame when we're down in flame, for nothing can stop the U.S. Air Force.
And the Marines.
From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, we will fight our country's battles in the air, on land and sea. First to fight for right and freedom, and to keep our honor clean. We are proud to claim the title of United States Marines. Army, Navy, Coast Guard, Air Force, the United States Marines.
Please welcome Stephen Tubbs, 710 KUNS talk show host.
Good evening, conservatives. That is a tough act to follow. I will not be singing. Just a side note, Don Whipple, who was up here, Semper Fi Marine in the Iwo Jima Survivor Cap, I had a chance 7 years ago to travel back with Mr. Whipple to Iwo Jima. Truly amazing. I host the American Veterans Show every Sunday at noon on 710 KNUS. I hope you'll take a listen. Coming up this week, we take a look back at the D-Day commemorations from earlier this week. I also have just released my latest documentary film on 2 POWs from Stalag Luft 1 in northern Germany who live now 73 years later, 25 steps apart. You can follow that on Twitter at 25 Steps Film. It is an honor for me to be here on Military Appreciation Night. I end every broadcast, and I have for more than a decade, with Remember Our Troops. There are people in the media, folks, that support this country, conservative values, our family, our freedom, our Constitution. Please know we exist. So thank you for listening. We are nothing without our veterans. Like tonight, I had a chance backstage to meet one of our speakers here, Mr. Chad Williams, a former Navy SEAL from 2004 to 2010. And I dare say, though he didn't say this, you're never a former SEAL. Just like you Marines out there would say, you're never a former Marine. I want to introduce you to Chad Williams, the author of Seal of God. Don't hold it against him or me. We are both from California. He will tell you not all of us Californians are alike either. Ladies and gentlemen, my honor to welcome Navy SEAL Chad Williams.
Please welcome Chad Williams, former U.S. Navy SEAL, an American hero.
All right. Thank you. Well, it is a huge honor and privilege to be here with you all. As you heard, I'm from California, but I'd say I'd probably self-identify as one of those deplorables, so everything's going to be okay here, I think. Former U.S. Navy SEAL. I imagine most of you in the room probably know what a Navy SEAL is, but there was a time back home in Cali where a girl asked me if I worked at SeaWorld or something. Maybe you all didn't know that SEAL is actually an acronym, though, and it stands for our areas of operation, sea, air, and land. To kind of give you an idea of what my team was doing on land on the last deployment I was involved in, out in Iraq, we were given the task of hunting down men that make suicide vests and there's roadside bombs, IEDs. And while we're out there, we're working with a group called the ISOF, that's the Iraqi Special Operations Forces. And one of our goals with these guys is to teach them how to fight their own fights. And so the best way to do that is not only train them on base, but actually go outside the wire and fight side by side with them. Well, if you can imagine a whole deployment going by, I'd say pretty good, because we bagged and gagged some bad dudes, we're making the world a better place, and coming up on what looked like just enough time on the calendar to do maybe one more operation. We weren't really sure if the ISOF was ready for us to pass the baton off to them, so we decided for this final operation, why don't we try and make it a sort of graduation operation? We'll let them plan the whole thing from the ground up, and we'll be there with them just in case things go bad. So they start from scratch. They need some intel. They're hitting the streets, and they find this source of information that tells them about a man that's an Iraqi policeman. So they find this guy, it's a policeman by day, but at night, back home, come to find out he's one of these bomb makers that we're looking for. And to kind of give you an idea of the type of characters that make a suicide vest, oftentimes these guys are not even motivated to actually strap it on themselves. In fact, they have such a difficult time finding somebody else to volunteer to put one of these things on that in one instance over there, this just shows how depraved and wicked they are. They took two mentally handicapped women and strapped these vests onto them, shoving them off into a crowded marketplace as they watch from a distance, setting it off with the remote, killing these women and obviously so many more. So it kind of gives you an idea of the type of characters that we're up against. But the ISOF, they've got this guy's number. They figured out where he lives. They've got this whole plan, how they want to approach the house, get in, grab this guy, extract him. Everything's looking pretty good. And they mention one other thing. They say, hey, look, you SEALs, you get shot at more than we do. And we think we figured out why. And so we're kind of curious what they thought it was. And they say, it's the color of your uniforms. I'm like, really, the color of our uniforms? Not the way we shoot, move, and communicate. You think it comes down to the mere color of a uniform? They're like, yeah. So we were wondering if for this final operation, you'd be willing to maybe take off your American colored uniforms, and we got a pile of ISOF uniforms for you guys to put on. It's like, all right, you want us to put those on to get shot at more with you? And they're like, yeah. It's like, fine. It's final operation. It's not really the uniform. It's the way we shoot, move, communicate, but whatever. So we get these uniforms on. Well, the funny thing is, my dark complexion, start growing out a little facial hair, then get on one of these Iraqi uniforms. I've got that thing on, and I'm looking around, and to be honest, I'm like, man, I really blend in with these fellas around here now. On this final operation, I'm standing up in the Humvee. It's a section called the turret, and I'm behind the .50 caliber machine gun, and for those of you that don't know, that's a weapon that could really reach out and touch somebody. I've got my night vision goggles on, I'm looking through my green little world and just kind of going over this mental inventory as all of these checks are firing off in my mind, the things that I know. I know that my weapon is headspace and time, that means it's ready to go. I know where this guy lives, I know how we're getting in, I know how we're getting out. But one unique thing I know about this operation that's gonna make it different than every other operation, I know that this is the final operation. Which also means I know just a matter of days from now, I'm gonna be back home, Southern California, surfing in the ocean. But here's what none of us really knew about that night, was that we were actually being set up the entire time to get thrown in the absolute worst circumstances we'd been in on this entire deployment. As we're being set up on an ambush, and we find ourselves engaging in this gun battle really for our lives. Now, before I touch on how that all turned out, I want to backtrack just a little bit and share with you part of my road to becoming a SEAL. You know, fresh out of high school, just attending a local community college, I finally came up with this idea that this is what I want to do. I want to be a Navy SEAL. And my dad, being a good dad, he wanted to put that to the test. And so he says, you know, hey, joining the military, son, not like anything you've ever done in the past, like playing ball, skateboarding, going to a local community college. Like, if you go and suppose you don't make it through SEAL training, or suppose you quit SEAL training, there's no just getting out. You will be in the military and probably going to be chipping paint off some boat in Japan if you don't make it through. I understand. And so I'm preparing. I'm getting ready. And as days go by, he invites me back into the house. And he says, all right, you really want to do this? You want to be a SEAL? Yeah, Dad, I want to be a SEAL. He goes, great. I set up a workout for you with the Navy SEAL. Check out my computer screen. I'll never forget looking over at the computer, and I'm thinking, my dad doesn't know any Navy SEALs. Like, what is this about? And there's a little one-liner in this email. It just says, can Chad come out and play tomorrow? I'm looking, like, play? Like, Dad, let me get this straight. You met some guy off the internet that says he wants to play with me, and you're arranging this now? And he's like, no, son, this guy's a SEAL. I'm like, Dad, you can't just trust everything somebody tells you on the web. He's saying he's a SEAL. All right, I'll go meet up with the guy. Well, as it turns out, there's more of a conversation my dad had with this guy on the phone prior to that email that I had no clue about at the time, but I'll give you the backstory up front. It's better this way. So he gets on the phone with this SEAL, and he says, hey, look, my son, he wants to be a Navy SEAL. But the thing is, he has no idea what he's getting himself involved in. And so I'm wondering if you could just do me a real big favor. Would you meet up with my son? And what I'm asking you to do is I want you to crush him. Just bury him. Beat this desire of becoming a SEAL out of him. So after thinking about it for a while, he shoots off his reply, can Chad come out and play tomorrow? So off I go to Oceanside, California, where I'm going to meet up with this Navy SEAL. His name's Scott Helvenston. He spots me in the parking lot right away. You, Chad? Yes, sir. All right, Bubba. I was Bubba from that point forward. Get on over here. He's got me dropped down doing push-ups and sit-ups. He brought his own portable pull-up bar. He can hang from anywhere. I'm doing pull-ups outside the bathroom at the beach. And, you know, finally he says, all right, Bubba, why don't you go for a run out into the wetlands? I'm going to catch up with you after about 15 minutes or so. I just got some gear I got to clean up. But 15 minutes of the run, I'll be there. So I take off down this trail out into the wetlands. I don't know what the final destination is, but here I go. Well, 15 minutes into the run where he should be showing up, I'm looking back, and I'm not seeing him anywhere. And I keep running, and I'm not seeing him. And I start getting this idea in my head that maybe, just maybe, I'm too fast for this Navy SEAL. He can't keep up on the run. And as I'm looking over my shoulder, again, it's just like a scene out of Terminator 2 where the bad guy, they call him the T-1000. Remember how he's in that police uniform and can like morph into knife hands and chase down that vehicle? Well, I'm looking back and that Navy SEAL like a T-1000 coming down this trail for me, right? There's nothing I could do to keep that distance. He closes the gap, catches right up to where I am, and I never saw what was coming next. As he gets just ahead of me, stops and turns on a dime, and I'm greeted by his fist, just impaling my stomach. And I still remember the feeling of just being clotheslined, going for a ride. That wind knocked out of me, my back hitting the ground, poof of dirt up all around me. And remember, you got to put yourself in my shoes for a moment here. At the time, the only intel I had was this. Some guy my dad met off the internet, he's got me on the ground in the wetlands now. I'm thinking child predator, like this is happening right now. He's on top of me, just ragdolling me, screaming, going ballistic. But then I hear these words. He says, you want to be a Navy SEAL? You better stay 3 paces behind me. And that's when it hit me, like this is it, and this is for real. If I quit right now, I'll forever be a quitter. I knew the way I respond in this moment is going to affect the trajectory of the rest of my life. And so I just reaffirmed this initial attitude that I started with, I'm going to die before I quit. So he gets up and just takes off down this trail. This goes on for a handful of miles. And I'll just say, looking back in hindsight, after having gone through SEAL training, I'll look back and say this was by far the most difficult singular workout, or I should say beatdown session, this encounter with Scott Helvenston. But I finally get to a point where he circles up. And he's pacing back and forth, and he's looking at me like he wants to fight me, like an MMA cage fighter waiting for the referee to say the words, let's get it on. And at the time, I'm this teenage skater punk kid. I don't want to project to the Navy SEAL that I'm willing to fight him at all. So I remember having this sort of self-dialogue as I look over at him. I'm thinking, okay, Chad, no direct eye contact. You don't want to set this guy off. Just use your peripherals, right? Don't look him in the eyes. And so he breaks this very awkward tension by asking me, he says, hey, if you would have gone another mile or two, would you have stayed with me? And I told him, Scott, I'll die before I quit. Well, he loosens up, completely changes his demeanor, goes, great, hey, you want to meet up again for another workout tomorrow? I'm kind of thinking like, are we going to address that flashback you had on the trail, pal? Like, what was that about? But what I didn't know is that this is a whole big setup. And so I just agree, I'll meet up again, yeah, sure. And so I'm going home, and apparently he's calling my dad, tells him, look, I know what you want me to do. I gave it a go, but I think your son might have what it takes to make it. I'd like to start working with him. So from that day forward, I began to meet up with this extraordinary Navy SEAL, Scott Helvenston. And I say extraordinary because this is a man that is a SEAL above other SEALs. He has all kinds of records. He's the youngest man to ever make it through SEAL training. He completed it at the age of 17 years old. That was only possible because he grew up in over 20 different foster homes. He's a world champion pentathlete. He is the fastest Navy SEAL on the SEAL training obstacle course. And one more record for you. You might recognize him from a TV program called Man vs. Beast, where he was the only man to beat the beast on the TV program. He raced a chimpanzee through an obstacle course and pulled ahead of the monkey on the monkey bars. It's true. I'm not making it up. Navy SEAL versus chimpanzee. Google it. I get to spend a lot of time with him as he's preparing me, investing into me. He's being the servant leader in my life, just getting me ready to make it, and he's got me prepared. So I sign up. I've got a date. It's set. I'm going to be shipping off to boot camp. I remember Scott, he tells me, Junior, because eventually I moved on in life. I was Bubba for a while, but eventually I became Junior. He really took me under his wing. He was like a second father to me. He says, all right, Junior, I'm thinking about taking this opportunity of going overseas again. It's only going to be a couple months long. He's kind of teetering on whether or not he wanted to do it, and he ends up deciding he's going to do it. I get a phone call from him, and he says, all right, I'm about to go do this thing, referring to going to Iraq. And he's just telling me that the timeline and just reminding me that he's going to be back in time to see me make it. And he says, I want you to know something I've never told anybody I've ever trained before. He says, I know you're going to make it through SEAL training. And so you can imagine just being in my shoes, what he means to me and what those words mean. I'm excited. I'm expectant. I'm looking forward. And so he's just saying, hey, I'm going to be back in time. We're going to see him make it through. So we get off the phone. We say our goodbyes. Can't wait to see you when you get back, Scott. So he's gone off in Iraq. I'm days away from just getting this journey started, going to boot camp. And I remember turning on a television one day as I'm just getting the day started. And I look over at the screen. I can't believe what I see on the screen. First, it's a picture of Scott smiling. And I'm thinking, what's Scott doing on TV? He didn't let me know he's going to be on TV for something. It's a typical profile shot they use before they introduce somebody onto a program. And so I'm just thinking, I thought he was out in Iraq right now. And I'm looking at this smiling image of him, and then I see in the lower third of the screen Scott's birth date, followed by a dash. And it says March 31st, 2004. And before I could process in my mind, translate what that means, this still image of Scott changes to video footage. And very similar to what you see groups like ISIS doing today, where they have these premeditated attacks, these beheadings, but they videotape it, or setting a Jordanian pilot on fire, but they want to spread this footage around as a sort of a scare tactic. I'm looking at this footage now as it's Scott and 3 other Americans in Fallujah, Iraq, as their vehicles burning in the background. And it keeps cutting to these different scenes as they're lifeless. This Iraqi mob, they have sticks and rods, and they're just beating, wailing away, trying to mutilate their bodies. Then they find rope, and they wrap it around their legs, hook them up to a vehicle. They go dragging them through the streets of Fallujah like it's a celebration, a parade to them. They get to the Euphrates River Bridge, string them upside down, and then they set their bodies on fire. And they begin to chant over and over in Arabic, looking into a camera. They have a message for us in America. They say, Fallujah's the graveyard of Americans. Fallujah's the graveyard of Americans. I think pretty needless to say, I'll never have the words to describe what all the surrounding events were like. It radically changes you. You don't go forward the same person from there. And there is a takeaway here that has to do with dealing with adversity. In the SEAL teams, part of our SEAL creed is we are forged by adversity. In the end, you can't really determine the adversity you're going to face in life. It's outside circumstances that come creeping in, so you don't get to customize it. But what's the one thing that you do have a grip on? The one thing you have controlling influence over, if you think about it, is how you respond. You determine whether or not that adversity is going to be a wing or a weight in your life. Will it be a weight that just sinks you, leaves you knocked down, never to get back up again? Or are you going to find a way to find a wing in there somehow, to rise to the occasion, to be fortified? And so when we lose somebody, what do? Typically, we will go back to that last conversation, the last time we were with them, and you go over it. What did we talk about? And I remember where Scott tells me, he says, Junior, I know you're going to make it through SEAL training. For me, that became my wing right there. That's what really forged me through that adversity. I became that much more determined that I am going to do this, but I want to do it for so much more now. I really understand the price of our freedom, that it's not free, it's paid for in the currency of our soldiers' blood on the battlefield. That was one of those things that really matured me right there. You know, bringing it back around to that final operation, I remember passing a sign in Iraq, and it says in Arabic, Fallujah, Iraq. And it's one of the last big signs you see before you go turning in to that town. And it dawned on me, I don't know how many times we passed it before, but it hit me for the first time on this last stop. I wonder if Scott looked at that same exact sign before he turned in. Little did he know, what was about to happen that night. And little did we know that we were being set up on this ambush that night. I wish I had time to hit the details of how, that night played out, but obviously I stand here before you alive. What I really want to emphasize with these final moments that I have with you, though, is that it doesn't always work out that way, does it? So we must remember that our freedoms are not free, but paid for in the currency of our soldiers' blood on the battlefield. And I think that we fortify our freedoms by keeping that at the forefront of our mind. In our Seal Creed, it says, in the worst of conditions, I will rely upon the legacy of those who have gone before me to steady my resolve, to guide my every deed. How do you push forward through tough times, adversity? We look back at the legacy of others. If we're going to go on an operation and maybe we're told all of you might not come home alive tonight, how do you get your mind off of self and focus on the mission at hand? We reflect on the legacy of those who have gone before us. Maybe the assault leader gets up and retells the story. Hey, remember Mike Mansour. Mike Mansour is a U.S. Navy SEAL. When he's on top of a roof in Ramadi, Iraq, he's providing cover for other SEALs that are out on the road. When from an unknown location, an insurgent comes running up to that rooftop, throws a hand grenade up there. It hits Mikey right in the chest. And if you can imagine, he had an exit just a step away as this thing falls into the dark. He could have saved himself, no problem. But here's the catch, is that there's other SEALs that were on that roof with him, and they didn't have time to get to their feet and pass that grenade. And so Mikey, in a split-second, selfless act, his final words to these guys was grenade, telling them to take cover, as he threw himself over the top of this grenade, covering it himself, and he absorbed the blast. He took that shrapnel, that metal, upon himself, but because of what he did, these other guys on the roof, they all lived. And so mark these words down in history, folks. Greater love has no one than this, than one that lays down his life for his friends. Remember my friend Scott, one of the last things he ever said to me was, Junior, when I go over there, perhaps I can make a difference. And so looking back, for the longest time, I didn't want to talk about it, frankly, because it's difficult. But at the same time, I realized that I have his story to share. And he lives on through the retelling of that story. And I'm reminded about how precious these freedoms are that we have based off of the life that he sacrificed. And so although he was killed and dragged through these streets and hung upside down from that bridge, it wasn't in vain. One of the last things, he says, perhaps I can make a difference. Greater love is no one than this, one that lays down his life for his friends. And then kind of bringing it all together here, one other legacy to look upon would be the man who spoke those words of greater love. That's a quote, and it comes from none other than Jesus of Nazareth. And I want to bring another perspective to you. Maybe you've never thought about what he did at the cross this way. But let guys like Mike Mansour and Scott Helvinson help you to understand those words and help you to understand what took place that day in Calvary. That just as Mikey absorbed the blast of a grenade upon himself so others could live, think about the fact that this Jesus of Nazareth, he didn't absorb the blast of a hand grenade, but he absorbed the wrath that we deserve upon himself. And why did he do that? So that we could live on with him in eternity. Remember, that grenade was never Mikey's problem. It was the other guys that were in trouble, but he took it upon himself, sacrificing himself to provide freedom and life for these others. Never forget that this Jesus of Nazareth, he never had the same problems that we did in terms of sinful, shameful life, but he absorbed that upon himself so that we could live on freely. And as my friend Scott killed and hung from that Euphrates River bridge, ultimately I would say, for freedom's sake, let's never forget that this Jesus of Nazareth, he was killed and he was hung from that cross of Calvary for freedom's sake. So greater love has no one than this, one that lays down his life for his friends. You can see it in men like Mike Mansour and Scott Helvinston, and look to the cross. That's the proper perspective of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. And so to me, those words carry double significance. Our soldiers shed their blood for our temporal freedom, and the Savior has shed his blood for our eternal freedom. One of the things these instructors let you do when you're going through SEAL training and you're about to enter into the most difficult part of training, which is called Hell Week, they want you to write on the inside of your hat, and they want you to write things that are going to get you to dig deep when the going gets tough. And the one thing I never saw written on the inside of anybody's hat that made it was their own name. And, you know, we're in a time now where people are so narcissistic, and you ask them when they set up to do a goal or an achievement, why do you want to do this? Sometimes the answer is, I'm doing this one for me this time. And it's so sad to hear that, because you know that's not going to be enough. Nobody that made it was ever looking at their own name on their hat. All right, chatty boy, I'm doing this one for you, you know. You got to reach outside of yourself, something bigger, something greater. And so the common theme that I saw written on the inside of hats that for guys that made it, this is the theme right here. It was faith, family, and friends. That's exactly what I had on the inside of my hat. I had a scripture, obviously I'm a man of faith. I had the word family on the inside of my hat. I had my friend, Scott Helvinson, his name on the inside of my hat. I had my girlfriend's name on the inside of my hat, and I still have the hat, and it's a little awkward to break out in front of my wife nowadays because I'm just kidding. I married her. It's obvious, so I get to keep the hat. Faith, family, and friends, those are the things inside of the hat. I guess with these final 12 seconds that I have left here, I'd like to challenge you with something. Before you leave this place and go back to your respective sphere of influence, have it determined in your mind, what is it that you would write on the inside of your hat? God bless you guys. God bless America. Thank you so much for your time.
Ladies and gentlemen, once again, please welcome Jeff Hunt, the chairman of the Western Conservative Summit.
Wow, what a hero. What a hero. What a night we've had, and it's just going to continue. Friends, under President Trump and Administrator Scott Pruitt, America is back, baby. Back to developing energy, growing businesses, and protecting our environment. Promises made on the campaign trail have been kept. Goodbye, Paris Climate Agreement. America is not going to abide by an agreement that punishes American jobs and industry while allowing China and Russia to grow their economies. The EPA is ending the job-killing war on coal. That matters to Western Coloradans. Yeah, we must allow energy companies to compete on an equal playing field. Do you remember when the Obama administration would label a small pond a waterway and force farmers to jump through federal bureaucratic hoops just to use their own water? Well, that overreach is ending under Administrator Pruitt's leadership at the EPA. President Trump and Administrator Pruitt are reducing unnecessary regulations to help America become the energy powerhouse it can be. In fact, during the first year of the Trump administration, the EPA finalized 22 deregulatory actions which could save Americans more than $1 billion in regulatory costs. We can grow our economy, we can create jobs, and we can protect the environment we all cherish. Scott Pruitt is providing that kind of leadership at the Environmental Protection Agency. Ladies and gentlemen, Colorado Christian University, the Centennial Institute, and the Western Conservative Summit are proud to present the 14th Administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Mr. Scott Pruitt.
Please welcome the Honorable Scott Pruitt, Administrator of the United States Environmental Protection Agency.
Thank you so much. It is good to be with you. It's good to be at this event. I was so excited to be invited to this summit. I heard wonderful things about it. Obviously, Colorado Christian leading this, the Centennial think tank, obviously leading Senator Armstrong's contribution to this. It is wonderful to be here to talk about the advancing of the Trump agenda with respect to the EPA, and I'm looking forward to spending some time with you tonight. I first want to say that we should recognize once again the commitment of those military families, the sacrifice of our armed forces across the globe, advancing liberty and freedom for the sake of this country, but the entire world. We should recognize that again and celebrate that this evening. I know you already have, but I think we should celebrate that again this evening. In fact, as you know, just this week, we celebrated the 74th anniversary of D-Day. And as we think about the sacrifice that those men and women made back then, remember the words of President Reagan on the 40-year anniversary in 1984. He said this: "These are the boys of Pointe du Hoc. These are the men who took the cliffs. These are the champions who helped free a continent. These are the heroes who helped end a war." We do it better than anybody in the world. We sacrifice consistently for freedom. This president is leading transformative change in Washington, D.C., not only to advance the economy, but we are safer today because of President Trump, and we're more prosperous today, and we're prosperous and more safe because of the commitment, the sacrifice, the leadership of these families that serve us, these military families and these soldiers across the globe, and we should celebrate that. So it's good to be with you tonight. You know, there are certain times in history, as you're living them, that you know you're living in a very key and consequential time. Certain epics, certain times. In fact, you know, oftentimes I look back to the founding generation and wonder what it might have been like to live during that time. You know, to be a part of the founding of this country. And sometimes I get nostalgic about that. I'm not sure about you, but I've often wondered what it would have been like to live at that time and be about the founding of this country. There's actually a verse in Ecclesiastes: "Do not say, why were the old days better than these? It's unwise to say such a thing." And when you think about that verse, the reason I think it's significant is because God places the responsibility on us in our time to advance liberty and freedom, just like we did at the commencement, at the start of our country, at the start, the founding of this great experiment. And I will tell you that as President Trump asked me to serve in this position, and as I began serving at the EPA, we are living a transformative change in Washington, D.C. right before our very eyes, and great things are happening at the agencies that's much different than what's happened the last several years. And I'd like to talk to you tonight about some of those things that we're seeing that are making a difference and how we're doing business differently. The first thing I would say to you, after all, the EPA is in the executive branch. Our focus should be on enforcing the laws as passed by whom? Congress. We shouldn't pinch it for Congress. It's fifth grade civics that an executive branch agency should only take the statute and administer the statute consistent with rule of law. That didn't happen under the past administration. In fact, we saw several examples of where the past administration pinch hit, made things up, and created great uncertainty in the marketplace and created harm on our economy. An example of that is the Waters of the United States rule. Jeff just made reference to that. I don't know how familiar you are with the Waters of the United States rule, but a rule that the previous administration adopted to redefine what a water of the United States is under the Clean Water Act. And that made me sound kind of benign, but it's not. Because when you define a water of the United States as a puddle, a dry creek bed, an ephemeral drainage ditch, that means as you build subdivisions, that means as you do farming and ranching, that means as you do oil and gas, as you use land from a private property ownership, your first stop for permission on using your own land was going to be Washington, D.C. That rule from 2015 was not about water quality. It was about power. It was about the power of Washington, D.C. It was about centralizing power at the EPA and saying to private property owners in Colorado, in states across the country, check in with us first before you use your own land as you've always done. In fact, I was in Salt Lake City last year with a member of the Army Corps of Engineers and with the governor of Utah, and I was standing outside of a subdivision that was being built, and this Army Corps of Engineers representative pointed to an ephemeral drainage ditch, and he said, "Scott, that is a water of the United States." And I looked back at him and I said, "It's not going to be anymore." Because as you think about that rule, we're going to fix that. In fact, I'll tell you, on February 28th of last year, the president signed an executive order instructing me to fix that Waters of the United States rule. And within 10 minutes of him signing that executive order, we began the process. And so this year, the Waters of the United States rule is going to go away from 2015, and we're going to provide a new definition, recognizing the importance of private property ownership, recognizing the role of the states, recognizing that land use decisions in this country need to be respected, and that shows you the commitment to rule of law by this president and by this administration. But there are other examples. Jeff mentioned the Clean Power Plan, the so-called Clean Power Plan that tried to regulate power generation in this country, reimagine an authority. It was a declared war on fossil fuels, a declared war on coal. Now think about that for a second. An agency of the federal government declaring war on a sector of your economy. Within 2 months of being sworn in as administrator, I was the first administrator in history to go underground at a coal mine. I went underground in Pennsylvania. If you've never done that, it's kind of claustrophobic. But I was 1,100 feet down, 3 miles in. And as I went into that coal mine, that long wall coal mine, there was about 40 coal miners that were on the job that day. And I looked at them. We have this on video. I looked at them and I said, the president has a message for you. And the president's message is this: the war on coal is over. In this country, we're going to respect the use of that, and the war on coal is over. Now, why does that matter? Well, it matters for several reasons. Because an agency of the federal government shouldn't declare war on any sector of your economy. We shouldn't pick winners and losers. We shouldn't use regulatory power to say coal is bad and renewables are good. We should, and this is going to be a very profound statement for you, we should make things regular for all those that we regulate, to make sure that we do it consistent with the rule of law and not try to favor one over another. This president has said that we can be about both regulatory reform and growing jobs in our economy. And you know what's happened over the last 16 months? $1 billion of savings at the EPA alone in regulatory cost. $8 billion across the entire Trump administration, $1 billion at the EPA. And as we have saved $1 billion, you know what else has happened? Better outcomes for the environment. Air quality in this country, 10% better under the Trump administration. Those Superfund sites that we regulate, those sites that have some of the most egregious pollution from lead to dioxin that is embedded in the soil and sometimes in water bodies and streams and rivers, we took off 3 times the number of sites last year from that Superfund list. This year, we're going to do 10 times the number from the previous administration. We are making great progress cleaning up the environment, improving air quality, and we as a country have nothing to be apologetic about to the rest of the world on how we do business in growing jobs and advancing the environment. Jeff made reference, yes, and we should celebrate that. Jeff made reference to the president's decision to exit the Paris Accord. He should be commended for that. That took tremendous courage and fortitude. He stood in the Rose Garden a year ago, June 1st, and said to the world, America does it better than anyone else. We're not going to agree to an agreement that puts us in an economic disadvantage compared to the rest of the world. After all, if the Paris Accord was about CO2 reduction, it was a huge failure. You know why? China didn't have to take any steps until the year 2030. India didn't have to take any steps until the year 2030, plus receiving $2.5 trillion in aid. Now, if it was really about CO2, that would not have happened. The president recognized that we were already leading in CO2 reduction. From the years of 2000 to 2014, we reduced our CO2 footprint by almost 20%. And just recently, an additional 2+%. We are leading the world in that regard, and we have nothing to be apologetic about, and we are doing it in a way that makes a difference for our economy. We've reduced those pollutants that we regulate under the Clean Air Act by almost 75%. Since the inception of the Clean Air Act, by growing our economy by 270%. So commitment to rule of law, doing things consistent with the statute, actually administering the statute as opposed to pinch hitting for Congress with the Clean Power Plan reversal, with the Waters of the United States reversal. We're getting it right, but we're also reforming our processes because the past administration, as they did rulemaking, they did it in secret. And let me give you a couple examples. They would actually engage in something called sue and settle, where they get sued by a third party. An NGO, the EPA would, and they'd go into a courtroom, sometimes in California, and they'd go into that courtroom and they'd actually cut a deal. They'd agree to a settlement, and they'd put it within a consent decree. And then they'd go to the rest of the country and say, this is now your obligation based upon this settlement that took place in a courtroom in California when states weren't represented and stakeholders weren't represented. It was called sue and settle, and it bypassed the regulatory process altogether. Last year, I ended that practice at the agency. I said the days of sue and settle are over. Regulation through litigation is over. We're going to do things the right way. But we also made a commitment to transparent science. I'm going to share a couple things with you that I think you'll find quite interesting. We have these advisory committees that serve the agency, several advisory committees, the Science Advisory Board and others, and they're made up of scientists from all over the country. But until we arrived, many of these scientists, as they provided counsel, independent counsel on rulemaking, which is what their job is, they also were receiving grants from the agency. We had a collection of scientists over a 3-year period, the last 3-year period, that received over $70 million in grants at the same time that they were doing what? Advising the EPA on the efficacy and the rightness of rules from a science perspective. That just simply shouldn't occur. And so I made a change last year. I said to those scientists, you can continue serving on the advisory committee, or you can receive the grant, but you can't do both. It's the Joshua principle. Choose this day whom you're going to serve, but you can't receive $70+ million in grants and also provide quote-unquote independent counsel to the agency. So we ended that process last year and required scientists to make sure that they were providing that independent counsel to the agency, and that's very important. But another step we took with science transparency, I think is even more impactful. I asked my team when I came in this position, I said, go back over the last 10 years or so and look at the major rules that we've adopted, whether it's the Clean Power Plan or others, and who did the science. Find out who did the science. And 75% of the time, the folks that did the science that were an underpinning of the rule were done by third parties outside the agency. Not even scientists at the agency, 75% of the time. That's wrong in and of itself, but here's the kicker. As they did the science, they would send the conclusions to the agency, and the agency would publish the findings, the summary, as a part of the rulemaking, but they wouldn't publish the methodology or the data. So it's like I wasn't very good at math, and my teacher always said to me, Scott, you can give me the answer, but you got to show me the work. And sometimes I didn't like to do that. But I will tell you, that's exactly what we changed to the agency. I said to our scientists in-house, I said, you know what, we should be doing more science in-house to begin with. But as we use third parties to provide scientific review for us, we're going to require something new. Not only are they going to provide the findings, they're going to give us the data, they're going to give us the methodology, so people can know whether what they've drawn right conclusions. They're going to show us the work. So when you think about the change on rule of law, being committed to rule of law, not terribly earth-shattering, but it truly is fundamental to the agency and new to the agency. Doing something consistent with the statute is wholly novel over the last decade or so. And doing something different with process on science and also the rulemaking process. But the other area that we've committed to, and this is equally important, is recognizing the role of states. You know, as a former attorney general for the state of Oklahoma, I get federalism. I spent a number of years making sure that states, the state of Oklahoma, in my estimation, and other states, were out there making sure that our interests were protected. Do you know over the last decade or so, the previous administration took a command and control approach and displaced states? I actually said to Colorado and said to states in the West and states all over this country, we know better, and we're going to dictate to you what's going to happen. We've reversed that. We have gone to the states and governors across this country and told them we're going to engage in true federalism, in partnering together to improve air quality and water quality. And why is that important? Because you know this. A one-size-fits-all strategy with respect to these issues does not work. The water in Utah, water issues in Utah are different than water issues in Minnesota. Utah is the second most dry state in the country. Minnesota's not. Air quality issues on the West Coast are different than what they are in the Southeast. We must, as an agency, embody that partnership, that federalism concept to make sure that we advance these principles. So we have given a rebirth to rule of law, a rebirth to process, and we've renewed our focus on cooperative federalism. And what has happened is truly transformative for this country. I will say this to you. We are living in a consequential time across the president's administration. This is reminiscent of what was going on in the 1980s. Because we've seen a shift the past decade toward a worldview that's different than what we believe. And I will say this to you. Asking the question, first and foremost, what is true environmentalism, is so important. Because the past administration told us that it was prohibition. The past administration said that though we've been blessed with all these natural resources, natural gas and coal, and farming and ranches where we can feed the world and power the world, their approach was what? Put up fences and do not touch. And you know who suffers when that occurs? This country and the world. So their approach was prohibition. Put up fences. I don't believe in that. I think that's wrong-headed. I believe to whom much is given, much is required. And I believe God has blessed us with tremendous natural resources that we should use for the betterment of mankind, to feed the world, empower the world, and we should be about stewardship, not prohibition. And we can advance jobs and the environment. So as we do this, just think about it. If we approach rulemaking from a stewardship mentality as opposed to a prohibition mentality, that means that as a country, we're going to see better outcomes. And I've shared with you what's already happening: cost savings and regulatory reform, better outcomes for the environment. And so this is an example that you can have your cake and eat it too. Those folks who say you can't, I don't understand that. You know, what else are you supposed to do with cake? So we're going to advance these principles to ensure that we truly achieve these outcomes in behalf of the American people. You know, I want to close with this. And I think it's important that you hear this, because as I ask the question, what is true environmentalism? It's very important for you to take that message back. Because in Washington, D.C., it's all about concentrating power there. This president is about putting power back in the hands of people in states across this country. And so as we advance these principles, it's important that we educate people that it's not a choice between the environment and jobs. We just don't believe that if you're pro-jobs, you're anti-environment. We believe that you can be about both. And as we do that, better outcomes, and we'll advance that for future generations. I started my talk by saying that there are certain times in history that you know when you're living them that they are transformative, that you're impacting future generations. And I will say to you that we're living one of those times. We're living one of those times at the EPA, but we're living in those times across the full administration. It takes courage. It takes commitment. It takes perseverance. It takes steadfastness to advance these things. Because the status quo, the entrenchment of Washington, D.C. is so strong that it takes the strength of someone like President Trump to say, we can do better for the American people. It is not serving the American people to say you have to choose between jobs and the environment. It's serving the American people to say we can do both. And I'm so thankful that we have a president in the White House today that is a man of courage and a man of results. And I will tell you, my commitment to you is I've served in this position. I knew it would be noisy. I knew it would be competitive. After all, the agency that I now lead was a bastion of liberalism. I mean, it's where they went to advance these worldviews that are antithetical to what I'm sharing with you tonight. So I knew that it would be noisy and competitive. And in the midst of all that, I think the greatest response is to keep going, keep advancing, keep persevering to make sure that the American people deserve answers today and answers in the future, that we can achieve both of these things and achieve them in the right way. And so please send that message back, send it all over the country, and let folks know that transformational change is happening. We should celebrate that and stay committed to it. So we can say to future generations, look back during that time. Just like, look, I'm a child of the Reagan Revolution. I was 12 years old in 1980. Turned 50 this year. As a 12-year-old in 1980, my dad was an entrepreneur. Those folks who lived during that time, even as a young man, it was magical. There was things going on at that time that we had hope and optimism about America returning to its place of prominence in the world. We have a responsibility. Let's embrace it. Let's do it the right way. Let's return America to greatness as the president is doing, and we can do it across the spectrum, and let's send that message out across the country. God bless you for what you're doing. Keep it up, and God bless America. Thanks so much.
All right, we're going to keep the night going. If you are a legislator or running for office, or you serve in some capacity, I want you to start to come up here and line up here. We're going to introduce legislators that are in the crowd. You'll get a chance to quickly introduce yourself from the main stage of the Western Conservative Summit. So go ahead and start to make your way here. We have a special video sent to us from the chairwoman of the Republican National Committee.
Hello, everyone. As you gather for the Western Conservative Summit, the Republican National Committee is so grateful for each of you. I'd like to congratulate Ed Meese for receiving the William L. Armstrong Award for his public service. This honor is well-deserved recognition of your lasting impact on our nation. Another special thank you to the great Americans who are serving in the armed forces. We're so grateful for your courage and sacrifice on behalf of our nation, and we're honored to support you. We're counting on you to stand by your conservative values and vote this November. Thank you for your hard work. Together, let's fight for our country and finish strong in 2018. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
All right, we've got some legislators in the House that want to come up and say hi here real quick. Come on up here. Don't be shy. Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Kevin Lumberg. Thanks. Senator Lumberg's a graduate of Colorado Christian University as well.
That's right.
You want to say a quick word?
It's just great being with you. I've been at every one of the summits, and they're always so encouraging, and it's fantastic to see this kind of a gathering right here in our own state, in our own capital, and I'm very grateful for all that's done here, and pray that we might continue this for many, many years.
Great. Thank you, Senator, for your service. You can head out this way if you want. Head on down that way. All right, come on out. Your name and what you're running for.
Pastor Gordon Alley, and running for State Senate District 34, and didn't know it, but we're just fighting for families, faith, and freedom, and that's your motto too. Thank you so much for hosting this conference.
Great, thank you so much. Senator Tate.
Good evening, Jeff, and thank you everyone for having us, and the legislators that come here today do get a kind of a gift of optimism, something to believe in. We have a cynical society out there, and thank you for what you do in providing the positive messages to our young people through your organization.
Great. Thank you so much, Senator Tate. Thank you. Come on up. Hi. Go ahead.
Hey, Jeff, and hey, everybody. Good evening. I'm Christine Jensen. I'm the candidate running for State Senate District 20 in Jefferson County. How do we feel about expanding our lead in the State Senate this year?
That'd be great. And is this the same district that Colorado Christian University is in?
Really close,
Very
just
close.
a few blocks away.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah,
thank you. Great, come on out. Hello, Senator.
Representative. Demoting me already, buddy. I'm State Representative Justin Everett. I'm also running for State Treasurer. I will see you tomorrow on stage when I'm #1 for Principles of Liberty. So if you want a true conservative as your next state treasurer, I'd appreciate your support. Thank you and God bless.
Thank you so much, Representative. Come on out. You probably recognize her from the dance moves in last year's opening Western Conservative Summit. You did a great job. Welcome.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you all for coming, whether you're from Colorado or another state. Welcome to Colorado, and we are going to win the governor's race.
That's right. Sherry Gibson, Vice Chair of the State Party here. Come on out. Great. Bo?
Good to see you. Hi, I'm Bo Beitman, representative from Sheridan County, Wyoming. I'll be here tomorrow night as the #1 Principles of Liberty representative for the state of Wyoming, and I'm running for the state senate up there in Wyoming as well. So thank you all for having us from Wyoming.
That's fantastic. Thank you for coming down. We need more Wyoming in Colorado, I think. Hello. Good to see you.
I'm Lynn Hutchings. I'm a former representative in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and I'm running for the state senate this year. Great. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Good to see you. Thank you for coming.
Hello, I'm Senator Fielder from the great state of Montana. It's great to see all you. And I just want to say in 2011, I was sitting on the sidelines wondering what was going on with my country, and I decided to go to a Republican local meeting and ended up running for Senate. I'm in there and off we go. So you can do it. Anybody can do it.
That's right. Thank you so much. Yep, head on that way. All right, sir. Kevin?
My name is Kevin Sipple. I'm running for House District 13. That's the west half of Boulder County, Clear Creek County, Gilpin County, Grand County, and Jackson County, way up near Walden. Boulder County will be the tall order, but I'm going to give it a good try. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for coming out. Hello, Johnny. Thank you for coming out.
Thank you. My name's Johnny Barrett. I am the candidate for Congressional 2 District Board of Education. First time in 50 years conservatives have lost control over education. Very sad times, all right? It's time to opt in for education. It's time to put a business guy in the place and look out for all the educators. If you don't know what the Board of Education does, if you like Common Core, thank the Board of Education. If you don't like Common Core, thank the Board of Education. Thank you.
Thanks, Johnny. Thank you. And we're finishing with one of my favorites. How are you, Casper? Great to have you here, my friend. What are you running for?
I'm running for Congress in CD1. You are in CD1. We can win this. This is a district that is normally not won by a conservative, but this time is going to be different. We're going to make it happen.
And who are you running against, Casper?
Running against Diana DeGette or whoever they put on the other side. She has an opponent right now, and her opponent has raised over $250,000 to run against her. She's an incumbent, but I think her time is done.
Casper, why should they support you?
I'm a Christian conservative. I'm doing work in the inner city right now. If we win Denver, we win the state. That's what it comes down to. We win Denver, we win the state.
That's right. Ladies and gentlemen, Casper Stockholm, one of our favorites here. He's doing a great job. All right, we're going to keep this going. We have another video for you.
The Centennial Institute is Colorado Christian University's think tank, working to advance faith, family, and freedom for our future. We host the Western Conservative Summit, the largest gathering of conservatives outside of Washington, D.C. But our work isn't just limited to this one amazing event. We are also training up the next generation of conservative leaders. Our students have gone on to serve in the military, work for members of Congress, U.S. senators, and even the President of the United States. They are attending grad school, starting businesses, and raising families. And our policy fellows are constantly providing a thoughtful, conservative voice to help inform the national news media. We also work right here in Colorado to advance conservative legislation and to support our local leaders. We conduct research on the most pressing issues facing our state and nation. And each month, we host public events featuring the brightest conservative minds from across the nation. The Centennial Institute is Colorado's bold, conservative public policy think tank. Join us today.
Please welcome back Dr. Donald Sweeting, Colorado Christian University President.
Well, good evening, everybody. What an inspiring, energetic day. Are you full? Do you have room for more? I hope so. I want to speak with you this evening about our theme for the Western Conservative Summit, the theme of fortifying freedom. Some of the last words spoken at the 2017 Western Conservative Summit were spoken by that British analyst who loves America, Os Guinness. He ended his address saying the deepest crisis in America today is not between Republican or Democrat, not between conservative or liberal, not between globalism and nationalism, but between the heirs and allies of 1776, i.e. the American Revolution, and the heirs and allies of 1789, i.e. the French Revolution. He said the great issue and question of our time is freedom and what kind of freedom we'll live under. So I've been thinking about this, wrestling with it. How do we fortify the kind of 1776 freedom? That's the freedom that was there at the beginning. The American Revolution and the French Revolution are a study in contrast. Two revolutions, two views of freedom. They had something in common. Both were democratic revolutions. Both dismantled the old order of monarchy. Both were influenced by the Enlightenment. But they had profound differences. They had a different view of liberty. The French Revolution's view of liberty was liberty as absolute autonomy, liberty apart from God. The American Revolution had a liberty that was an ordered liberty, a liberty under transcendent norms and traditions, a liberty under God. In fact, you could sort of crudely characterize the difference in the revolutions this way. 1789, the French Revolution, influenced by a radical Enlightenment. 1776, the American Revolution, influenced by the conservative Enlightenment. 1789, they pushed the separation of God and state. 1776, it was about the separation of a national church and state. 1789 was statist. 1776 spoke about limited government. 1789 pushed violently against the Christian faith. 1776 was shaped by the Christian faith. 1789 was a prototype for later utopian and communist revolutions. 1776 was a prototype of constitutional government and democracy. 1789 ended in a reign of terror and a dictator named Napoleon. 1776 ended in a constitutional government that has lasted almost 250 years and brought the blessings of liberty to the world. That's the difference. Edmund Burke, the British statesman and the father of the modern conservative movement, wrote a book in 1790 called Reflections on the French Revolution, and he actually supported the emancipation of the American colonies, but he opposed the ravages of the French Revolution with its armed doctrine. He said it was a phenomenon of a totally new kind. He said that it was based on a theory and progressive philosophy that was deeply flawed in its view of God, flawed in its view of state, flawed in its view of religion, flawed in its use of abstract reason to direct the course of society, reason alone, flawed in its view of humanity, and flawed in its view of freedom as an absolute liberty. Arnold Toynbee, the great historian, said the French Revolution involved the fanatical worship of human power. Why does this matter, you say? 1968. 1968 is a year that is now seared in the American conscience. It was a year of revolution. This summer we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the summer of '68. That was a year that saw political revolutions in Europe, Paris, Berlin, and London. It was a year in which that same spirit of revolution came to the United States with riots in major American cities and unrest and protests on almost all the major college campuses. 50 years later, 1968 looms large as a year initiating a massive cultural, political, and moral change in our country. And looking back from our perspective, we look at it as a kind of turning point in history. It was the beginning of a moral and cultural revolution. I look at it as a kind of mini French Revolution that happened on American soil and pushed the 1789 kind of freedom. It was a revolt against the American order and the Western order. They began to talk about deconstructing Western civilization and its value system. There was a deliberate rejection of our Jewish and Christian roots. After the 60s, the left began saying that the founders were no longer relevant, the Constitution could be changed in its meaning, the Declaration was not that important. It was driven by a destructive and nihilistic relativism. 1968, and you say, well, why does that matter? Fast forward 50 years later, and here we are. And you can see the outworking of this cultural revolution on our universities, in our schools, on our families, and in our culture. And so Os Guinness' question is a relevant one. What kind of freedom will we embrace? The freedom of 1789 or the freedom of 1776? As for me and my house, I know which kind of freedom leads to prosperity and life. It's the freedom of 1776. And it caused me to ask another question, a practical question. Then how do we fortify this kind of freedom in our day? Fortifying freedom takes a plan. We need a freedom plan. I often think we don't have a freedom plan. We need a freedom plan that involves politics but goes way beyond politics, a plan that goes deeper than politics, that will start to restore the foundations of a free society, that will transmit values intentionally to the younger generation so that they're embraced and they're lived out. How will we do this? We must do this, but how? I'd like to suggest a starting point, a few starting points, steps towards a freedom plan. The first thing I think we have to do is to restock our memories. You can't make America great again unless you go back to what made her great in the first place, right? You have to go back. And one of the greatest challenges of our time is that progressive ideology wants to sweep away history, American history, Western history, Christian history. And by the way, this is one of the differences between the conservative and the progressive. One wants to abandon the past. The other wants to preserve that heritage. The past is generally irrelevant for the progressive because it's all about the future and the present. They're ashamed of our history, Western history, American history, the Founding Fathers, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. We need to begin by restocking our memories. You say, how? Teaching history, for one, teaching political history, economic history, American history, Western history. We ignore the past, and you can see it in this generation's students. They don't know about their past. And then along with that, to restock our memory, we must tell stories. Tell stories by venerating heroes, not as perfect people, but as courageous people. People like the Pilgrims and Whitefield and Washington in 1783 and Paul Revere and Patrick Henry and many, many others. We must get back to telling our stories and pass them on. We restock our memory by teaching the Declaration and the Constitution, our national covenant. There was a poll among young people recently, and it said they don't know or even value the First Amendment. What's happened? What's happened? In the chaotic Middle Ages, monasteries sprang up all over Europe. They were planted in dark pagan forests in Germany, Ireland, and England, and they were outposts of memory to keep learning alive. A sacred transmission took place, which was vital for the rebirth of Western civilization. We begin our freedom plan by restocking our memories. We must do that. Secondly, our freedom plan must teach virtue. Freedom requires virtue. Our founders said if we turn away from moral law, we will forfeit the blessings of liberty. Our system is a system of self-government. Ben Franklin said only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. I'm not talking simply about values, but virtues and vices that we teach. Right and wrong, good and evil. Not simply 12 rules for life, as helpful as they may be, but 10 commandments that are true for all time. We must teach virtue as part of our plan to restore the foundations. And then thirdly, we must encourage faith. Faith in God. Alexis de Tocqueville, a Frenchman who came to America and observed her greatness, said, "Liberty cannot be established without morality and without faith. Virtue requires faith." John Adams said, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It's wholly inadequate for the government of any other." Our nation was created in the fear of God. And if you put God over all, you'll be amazed at how many other things fall into place. Encourage faith. Faith in God. Faith that turns to the Bible, the book that created Western civilization. Faith that leads us to prayer, to pray for our nation, to pray for others, to pray for awakening and revival. That's key to restoring freedom of the 1776 kind. And then finally, in the beginning of my freedom plan, I'll put, we must build mediating institutions. You say, what are mediating institutions? That's a phrase used to describe smaller forms of human association that stand between the individual and the huge impersonal state. Pre-political institutions that are the foundation of civil society, from which conservative thought
naturally arises. They are value-forming and generating agencies. Mediating institutions, you say, like what? Like volunteer associations, but especially the family as a mediating institution. The family, the smallest, most vital unit. The family, the first school, the first church, the first law court, the first economy, the first community, the first bank, the first hospital that any human being ever encounters. Families based on God's design. Families which the early Presbyterians said are the seminary of the church and the state. Families where you have children and you are there for your children, guiding them, and you stick together for life. And you encourage policies that will encourage that kind of strong family. That's huge for freedom in the future and restoring freedom of the 1776 kind. But let me mention two other mediating institutions that you should think about. Secondly, houses of faith. Now, as a Christian, I speak of the church as a house of faith. It's been the beating heart of our culture. It's an incubator of faith. It teaches transcendence, permanent things, God's law, the order of created reality, God's holiness, God's love, divine accountability, God's ultimate judgment. We need to work so that churches are healthy and thriving and free. It's so vital for our country and for the 1776 kind of freedom. Eugene Peterson said the church is the institution God has set at the center of the world to keep the world centered. That's part of my freedom plan. I think it's key to a 1776 kind of freedom. But the final kind of mediating institution that's important is to build solid schools. Not just any schools, but good schools. Elementary and secondary, sometimes it means restoring schools that have drifted, but often starting new alternative schools. Schools that teach morals and manners. Schools that teach history, that aren't ashamed of our nation's past. Schools that teach English lit and geography and basic grammar and basic math and basic science. That's huge for the kind of freedom we're talking about. And then universities and colleges that are rightly ordered and religiously informed, that have core curriculums, that teach noble virtues, that are immersed in the history of Western civilization, that teach Plato and Aristotle and Homer and Dante and Shakespeare and Bible and theology, that teach students about permanent things. Anthony Esolen, wise academic that he is, said it's not enough to reform the old schools. Many are beyond reforming. But he said, ultimately, we must build new colleges. That's an absolute necessity. So mediating institutions are part and must be part of this plan. Mediating institutions, de Tocqueville said, they are the bulwark of freedom against the encroaching power of the state. Without them, a powerful state steps in, and these institutions, these mediating institutions, basically, they promote limited government by holding back the state. Mediating institutions where conservatives are made, because only as these are strong will we see people raised up to embrace the 1776 kind of freedom. Modern American conservatives are dedicated to the task of this tradition of liberty. We are keepers of the flame of liberty, but to do this, it requires a more robust freedom plan than we have. It requires a plan like I've just said, and many other things as well. Because freedom, friends, is not a cliche, it's a precious gift that must be fortified. In closing, I want to say this. Let me remind you that there was also another revolution that started in the 1960s. It was a conservative revolution. There were people like William F. Buckley and Russell Kirk and Ronald Reagan himself, who started speaking out at that time because they knew what was coming. And at that time, Reagan left us with these powerful words. He said, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We don't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same, or one day, he said, we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like in the United States where men were free. Ladies and gentlemen, we must fortify freedom.
Please welcome Derek Schuler, CEO of Ascent Classical Academies.
Well, good evening. I appreciate Dr. Sweeting pretty much setting up for me to talk about education, and everything he was talking about is what we do. So I'm glad to be here this evening to talk about education and freedom. I'm the founder of Golden View Classical Academy in Golden, Colorado, and also a network of classical K-12 charter schools known as Ascent Classical Academies. We have at Ascent Classical Academy our first replication school opening up in Douglas County this coming fall. We're working on one in eastern Boulder County right now as well, and a couple others we're planning to open throughout Colorado. The interesting thing about our schools is that all of our schools have partnered with the Hillsdale College Barney Charter School Initiative. And you can find out more information about what we're doing at ascentclassical.org. I'd like to make a couple just brief comments on what is a charter school. So first of all, charter schools are tuition-free public schools. Oh, excuse me. So we have curricular autonomy, so we get to select our curriculum, and we have independent governance as well. We are not selective. Our kids are admitted on the basis of lottery, and we serve all kids, including those with special needs. We operate with taxpayer funding, operating dollars, but we also pay for our own facilities out of that as well, something that government-run schools don't do. So a question, why do we educate our children? Is education something that we recognize as being good for its own sake, to prepare children to be happy and flourish in life? Or is it this uninspiring idea of merely preparing them for college and career? Well, those are important considerations. Have we reduced the attainment of knowledge and development of character and virtue to getting a job? Where does the passion of contemplation on what it means to live a good life fit in the modern day idea of success in education? So I'd like to step back and look at the ideas and the notion of education back in the era of the founding of our country. The American founding fathers were in strong support of education and recognized the need to educate the masses, yet they didn't include it as a responsibility of the federal government. Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Northwest Ordinance, religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. He also wrote that education was needed to enable every man to judge for himself what will secure or endanger his freedom. Many of the founders believed in educating people, the people, and it goes along with Franklin's famous warning to Miss Powell after the Constitutional Convention when he quipped, "A republic, if you can keep it." Today, we're in an era where the ideas of America being a constitutional republic meant to protect individual and natural rights is being lost. We are entering an era of democracy where the majority rules, which the founders warned was a milestone on the road to tyranny. Today, education is a massive system, both primarily funded and provided by the government. So what could possibly go wrong? Well, for starters, adjusted for inflation, spending on education has tripled since the 1970s, and student achievement has remained flat that entire time. School administration is growing at rates far surpassing student enrollment and the growth of teachers. The Colorado State Pension System, or PARA, now takes over 20% of school payroll as the employer contribution, along with 8% from teachers. I had a chance to talk with my friend Heidi Ganal, a CU regent who was up here earlier today, about the impact of this on higher education. So if kids starting college today, 36% of them require remedial classes at the college level. Our 6-year graduation rate today is 53%, and 75% of Americans can't name the 3 branches of the federal government. Shockingly, I know that was bad, but shockingly, 40% of adults nowadays prefer socialism to capitalism, and that number is only growing. While capitalism has created more wealth across the broadest segment of society in the history of mankind, socialism has resulted in the deaths of 100 million people in order to be properly implemented. But are we teaching this in schools today? Our schools and colleges, in order to be tolerant and open, have become intolerant. The pursuit of the good, the true, and the beautiful is being turned upside down. Some schools teach that truth doesn't exist today, but is based on one's own personal experience and worldview. This lack of moral grounding has set our young people adrift. We've destroyed heroes like the founders of our nation, removed statues from parks, and rewritten textbooks. Since progressive education started taking over in the 1930s, and you can read about this in the book To Kill a Mockingbird in the first couple chapters, we've created generations of young people less prepared to live in and maintain a free society, now willing to trade liberty for security. So why does this matter to us? Well, obviously, the cost and the return of taxpayers is important. We spend a lot of money in public education. But I think the greatest concern to us is this change in attitude and thinking among Americans, and it's a current and future threat to our nation, and the ideals of freedom and self-government. Now, we as parents, we can opt out of public education and choose to send our kids to private schools or home schools, as many families have done. But as a charter school founder, that was my backup option. In our schools, which my children attend, students receive an American classical education, described pretty much by what Dr. Sweeting was just talking about. With a firm foundation in the history and philosophy of the West, they read the great books, develop a keen understanding of how America came to be, and the importance of the free market in living as a free person. It's a fantastic program, and our kids will have a great foundation and background when they graduate. But then what? Who will they be living with as neighbors and colleagues? Well, they're living among or outnumbered by others who have never been exposed to these ideas or history. This question is what has led us to work to establish more classical charter schools available to the public. But also, why what's happening in public education should concern us all, and we need to be vigilant if we want to expand or even protect the ideas we embrace at events like this to remain in the mainstream conversation in our society. Across Colorado, special interests like teachers' unions have been turning and solidifying their influence with local school boards on campaigns to restrict and stifle school choice, to include charter schools, private schools, and home schools. In Jefferson and Douglas counties, for example, unions have concealed and spent enormous amounts of money in elections and recalls, only to be revealed after elections have taken place, and in some cases under court order. They've been able to do this in large part because local school board elections take place in off years. This leads to a very low turnout, and it's easy to target the small segment of the community that actually shows up and votes in these elections. As we've seen with our own charter schools and other schools across the country, school boards aren't always about supporting and providing the best options families want and demand. Frequently, their interests are to protect their government-run schools and controlling what options we as parents have that are acceptable to them. This is important to note in Colorado since school boards typically have exclusive say over what kind of charter school options your family has access to. So the stakes are high. And what can we do? 3 things. Pay attention to your local school board races, ballot issues, and vote. We need to wake up to what's going on in our school districts and public education. Many school districts are running tax increases this year, and we need to be asking good questions. While I support teachers being paid what they're worth, we should ask why administration is growing faster than student enrollment. While all school board candidates say they support school choice, they won't say that they want to be the ones to define and limit your choices. Number two, we need to support the expansion of high-quality charter options by helping end exclusive chartering authority in Colorado. This is what gives local school boards exclusive rights to approve or limit charter schools and other publicly funded options. It's a clear conflict of interest to expect local school boards that operate their own schools to be fair partners with charter schools they see as competition. We sometimes hear claims about respecting local control, and I will say that local control is parent control, and parents having the right and responsibility to determine the upbringing of their children. This will allow more options like Ascent Classical Academies and Golden View Classical Academy to offer a rigorous American classical education and focus on the development of good character and virtue to expand throughout Colorado. And third and finally, support the overhaul of PARA, the state retirement system. Most of the increased funding that's going into education today is going straight into this bankrupt program and not into teacher benefits. Less than 10% of all teachers who ever pay into the current state retirement plan never retire with full, or less than 10% actually ever retire with full benefits. So the majority of charter school teachers never invest in the system, and it's not a benefit that brings people into the profession. Para reform helps us put more money into classrooms with existing funding. So education and freedom are closely linked, and it's up to you and us all to make a difference. We need to focus and work together on what should be our common goal: to prepare our young people to preserve the republic we know as America, if we can keep it. So thank you.
Please welcome Lauren Cooley, the editor of Red Alert Politics.
Good evening, Western Conservative Summit. My name is Lauren Cooley, and I'm an editor at the Washington Examiner. That name makes you think that we just cover politics within the Beltway or the Washington Swamp, whatever you may call it, but we really cover more than that. We cover stories across the nation, and especially on college campuses. I'm fortunate to be the editor of the Red Alert Politics section. It's our Young Contributors program where we have high schoolers, college students, and young professionals writing for us about millennial trends, higher education policy, liberal bias in the classroom, and of course, free speech on college campuses. I love my job because I get to interact with young people on a daily basis, and we know that the free speech battle on campus is so important because what we see happening on campus today is what's going to be downstream in culture 5-10 years from now. Now, unfortunately, the left knows this too, and that's why they have infiltrated education. They've done it in college, they've done it in K through 12, they're starting in preschool and even in the crib, and that's ridiculous. But they know that when you take young minds and you can indoctrinate them with ideology, you can grow the size of government and change the electorate for their advantage. So, what can we do to combat that? Well, one thing is that we are empowering young conservatives all across the country to be able to go out and emboldenly fight for free speech on college campuses. You know, it seems bleak. I'm going to read a couple headlines from the Washington Examiner from our campus coverage. 1, college ends annual tradition of playing national anthem at commencement. 2, college offers Masters of Elementary Education concentration in anti-racism. 3, communist group threatens campus young conservatives with assault. But let me tell you that young people are fighting back. I know that from traveling across the country, speaking on college campuses. I know that from our 30 Under 30 awards that we do every year. And I know that from our next speaker and the winner of our Under 30 speech contest. Let me tell you a little bit about her. Madison Spanadimos. She's our winner this year. She's a freshman at Our Lady of Mercy Academy from Long Island, New York. That's a freshman in high school, by the way. At 14 years old, she's served on 2 political campaigns. She's a member of the Young Americans for Freedom, Turning Point USA, and Prager University. In addition, Oh, we got some Prager University fans in here. That's great. In addition, she's a Girl Scout that's highly involved in their media ambassador program. She's also done a program with NASA Nobel Prize winning scientists. She was awarded a first place Respect Life contest, is a winner of multiple academic achievement awards, and including the New York State Attorney General's Courage, Character, and Commitment Awards. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you someone who gives me hope for the future of the country. Our Red Alert Politics Under 30 speech winner, Madison, come on out. Let's congratulate you.
Please welcome the 2018 Under 30 speech winner, 14-year-old Madison Spanadimos.
Wow. Before I get started, I want to thank the Centennial Institute and Colorado Christian University for hosting this summit. I remember attending my first conservative conference a little over a year ago, and it was there that I had my first introduction to what it really means to be a conservative and the responsibility that we have as Americans to defend our Constitution and defend our values. From this point on, I was inspired to stand up for these principles on my campus and in my community. I'd also like to thank Red Alert Politics for sponsoring this contest. The idea that a young 14-year-old girl will take the same stage as the Attorney General of the United States, who, yes, I am hoping will write my absent note back to school on Monday, is a direct testament to the American dream. It's a testament to what I believe is one of America's greatest promise. The promise that if you put your mind to something and work tirelessly for it, you certainly can accomplish it. Take the 2016 election. Before June of 2015, Donald Trump was one of America's most successful businessmen. He took his father's business and grew it into a billion-dollar company. I highly doubt he would have been able to accomplish this if America felt the burn, taxing all Americans at inconceivable rates, creating an unemployment boom instead of an economic one, or nationalizing healthcare, but really handing Americans a death sentence due to extremely long waiting periods and poor quality of medical care. All consequences of so-called free and fair healthcare. The left desperately needs to take a reality check. Have they heard of Venezuela, the VA under President Obama, or little Alfie Evans? Fortunately for these United States, American patriots took this reality check. In November of 2016, they marched to the ballot box, demanded change, and voted for a stronger, more prosperous America. They voted for a president who would stand up to our adversaries and stand with our allies. The silent majority voted for someone who would negotiate with America's best interests at heart, bringing home American prisoners, not sending terrorists back to the battlefield. They said no to illegal immigration across our southern border, and yes, I'll say it, against vicious gangs. They stood up for Second Amendment rights, understanding there is no America without this amendment. And they voted against worthless government spending. Like, did you know that the State Department used your taxpayer dollars to buy more likes on Facebook because the page wasn't getting enough attention? Or when nearly $5 million was given to the University of Tennessee because they wanted students to wear fruit and vegetable costumes around campus to encourage healthy eating. I really highly doubt that that did anything. And lastly, they voted to put money in the pockets of all Americans, even though it's apparently crumbs to some millionaire congresswoman who is the voice for our poorest Americans. Now, if we take a look at President Trump's accomplishments, and we know there are so many, and compare them to the fake news media's coverage of them, you'd think we'd have a totally different president. While the media is busy worrying about President Trump's diet and calorie intake, and though we thank them for their concern about his health, the average American is worrying less about the threat of nuclear war and how he or she will put food on the table. While the media ceaselessly covers the so-called Russia investigation, or witch hunt as some of us like to call it, the stock market is growing. And while James Comey is on virtually every primetime news show ranting about his higher loyalty, which, let's be real, it's really to the Never Trump establishment, President Trump is only loyal to us. And of course, as we all know, Donald Trump is extremely anti-woman, would never put women in his cabinet or senior staff, and certainly would not have just had Gina Haspel appointed as the first CIA director. And we also know that President Trump is certainly a racist and never would pardon any African Americans ever, right? Now, we take this double standard, it's evident everywhere, but especially in terms of our youngest Americans. We recently saw 2 terrible, horrific tragedies in Santa Fe, Texas, and Parkland, Florida. Instead of reporting on the events of these tragedies, the media decided to focus on the Never Again movement. They were quick to label all high school students as staunch gun control advocates. And if I had some advice to the students who were walking out, I would tell them to walk back in to school, open up their textbooks, and learn about what dictators do before assuming power. And it has something to do with taking away your right to bear arms. And I have some good news for you. There are many studies and much research that leads us to the conclusion that Generation Z, which is comprised of anyone born after 1995, will be the most conservative generation since World War II. They're fundamentally pro-freedom, have capitalist-leaning views, and are closer to the right on social issues than you may think, especially pro-life issues. What's even more remarkable about how the conservative movement is growing among young people is the environment in which they're becoming conservative. Just look at our higher education. The majority of colleges employ all liberal professors, have textbooks that create a history narrative that's manipulated to please the left, and our media has its own version of the truth. There are trigger warnings and safe spaces everywhere you turn on campus. And professors, well, they're so biased against conservative students, some fear speaking out in support of capitalism or even admitting that Donald Trump is president because they don't want to be downgraded. I've had this experience myself, and so have many others. So yet again, it's begging the question, how are students becoming more conservative? It's not a simple answer, and maybe it has to do with students learning from their parents. We should never question the sanctity of the traditional American family, or the one conservative teacher they'll have throughout their school career. But I think there are 2 ideas that are really helping our movement out, and it's freedom and social media. So imagine you're a young college student, you're going off to school for the first time, you're excited to play a role in your future and make decisions for yourself. If you take that idea, it aligns directly with conservative principles. As conservatives, we believe that businesses should make decisions that are best for their consumers and their employees themselves. They don't need government to step in and make them for them. Take a look at states' rights. How could one possibly argue that California and Texas have the same needs? It's simple, you can't. And whether it be freedom of the press, as we love being able to choose Fox News over CNN, or freedom to assemble, or freedom to practice the religion of your choice, Americans love freedom. So why aren't some voting for politicians who value freedom? Another critical idea here is social media. Whether we like it or not, social networking sites are consumed by politics. Whether it be your grandfather, who's a World War II veteran, having a polite but not so polite conversation with your cousin who enjoys wearing a grabs back t-shirt, or the fake news article from impeachtrump.com in your newsfeed, social media is consumed by politics. And what really doesn't help is the possibility that the social networking sites themselves are playing a role in this misinformation epidemic. Back to the same question, how are students becoming more conservative? Well, our movement is lucky because we have some fantastic websites and sources that are helping to spread the facts about the issues. Whether it be articles from sources like Red Alert Politics, The Daily Wire, Turning Point News, Future Female Leader, or Lone Conservative, students are learning the facts clearly, concisely, and are learning all sides of the issue. Whether it be videos from PragerU, when students are given the facts and not just the feelings, they will make educated decisions. Now, this all sounds great, right? The conservative movement's growing, students are becoming more conservative, so, this is okay. We don't have to vote in the midterm elections, right? We can kind of take a break. That couldn't be farther from the truth. Unless you envision an America with President Bernie Sanders and Vice President Elizabeth Warren, which just raised my blood pressure. I don't know if that was just me or you guys too. So what can you do? You must get involved however you can. It is absolutely crucial. In addition, if I could leave you one final piece of advice, it would be to never forget the American heroes who gave their lives to serve this country. If we keep them in mind and realize that we're all working together to establish a better America for our children, I think we certainly will accomplish President Reagan's shining city on the hill. And if I can leave you with one final phrase, it would be borrowed from Pennsylvania Avenue. And I think you know where I'm going with this. It would be to make America great again. Thank you so much.
Stay out here, stay out here, stay out here. Friends Madison Spanadimos. The future of this country is strong with leaders like this. We're proud of you. Thank you so much. 14 years old. That's amazing. Thank you, Madison.
Please welcome Dwayne Lester, Americans for Prosperity Foundation.
In 2006, I spent a great deal of my life in an 8x8 locked metal box. I was an armed security guard at a nuclear power plant. This job afforded me a lot of time and very little to do. We were like insurance. They had to have us, but they never wanted to use us. And what this time gave me was time to read, and I took advantage of that. In 2006, I actually set a goal of reading 100 books in a year. And I accomplished that goal in early December, and immediately set another goal of never doing anything that stupid again. That is a ridiculous amount of books. I had a good average going, and then I said, "You've never read Atlas Shrugged," and that blew the average. But I don't remember what book it was in, but I remember the quote. It was from Thomas Paine, and it was from an essay called The Crisis. And Paine wrote, "A good parent says, if there must be trouble, let it be in my day, so my children may know peace." Man, that was like a gut punch to me. See, at that time in my life, I had 4 kids. And I'd been sitting in this locked metal box, reading books and acquiring all this information. And I thought, we have trouble in our day right now, don't we? If there must be trouble, let it be in my day, so my children may know peace. And I thought to myself, what good is all this knowledge if there's no action? What good is knowledge without action? And so I decided to do what I knew. I was a journalist in the Navy for 5 years, so I started a website, allamericanblogger.com. And I wrote there starting in 2007. And in 2012, the Heritage Foundation and the Franklin Center awarded me their first Breitbart Blogger Award, which was an unexpected honor. A couple of years after that, I took a look around my home state of Missouri, and I saw that no one was writing about politics on a state level from a center-right perspective. So I started the Missouri Torch, and that quickly became one of the most widely read conservative political blogs in the state. And today, I'm the strategic director for the Americans for Prosperity Foundation's Grassroots Leadership Academy, which has been training activists in different states across the country, including Colorado. But I never lost that feeling that if there must be trouble, let it be in my day, so my children may know peace. And it's even more important to me today, because today I have 8 kids. Settle down. It's okay. I always say 8 kids, and then when I see that look in their eyes, I say, so far. I have a boy named Silas. He's about this tall. He's 6 years old now. He's got curly brown hair and blue eyes that would look big on a cow. And he has dug a hole in my front yard for no apparent reason whatsoever. I walked out there the other day, and he had the neighbor kid sitting in the hole. The hole was filled with water, and he was standing over it with a clipboard like he's taking water displacement measurements, and I don't even want to know what's going on. I want you to imagine my boy Silas, and when he digs in this hole, I mean, that's where he's at. That's his whole world. He's digging away in this hole right here, and he doesn't notice this big dog walk into the yard over here. Now, we've all seen dogs like this around our neighborhoods, right? Dogs that get in fights with other dogs, dogs that chase bigger kids. They're mean and they're angry. And you could see that this dog has his eye on my son and means to do him harm. And there's absolutely no question that without hesitation, I step into that breach, right? I get between my son and a clear and present danger. And I don't know what that dog will do to me. That dog may turn on me. That dog may run away, but I don't hesitate. And I would wager that most of the people in this room would step into that same breach to protect my child. My question to you is, why is it any different when it's Silas here and socialism here? Socialism is going to kill a lot more kids this year than dogs will. In the past 100 years, collectivism in its many forms has killed more than 100 million people, usually through starvation. And if not starvation, then their government's just mowing them down for asking for the same rights that so many Americans take for granted today. I've told that story to activists for the past 2.5 years, from Phoenix, Arizona to Boonton, New Jersey, from Miami, Florida to Wasilla, Alaska. With the Grassroots Leadership Academy, our mission is to educate and empower individuals to promote a free and open society where coercion is limited and a bias towards liberty prevails. And we're operating in 36 states and working with people every day to accomplish that mission. We hold trainings that teach people the basic principles of liberty, but then how to communicate them in ways that people can understand, because if you know them but you can't explain them, well, that's not much help. We teach people how to create communities out of networks and how to start movements in their own areas, how to promote free societies, how to make change. And part of the things that we do is we teach people how to tell their why. The story you heard was my why. I fight for liberty to protect my children, to make sure that I never have to hear a child or grandchild of mine cry from a state-created hunger that I have nothing to do to fix. One of the whys that we've heard just recently was from a teenage boy in Rapid City, South Dakota. He told a story about growing up in China, about being passed from foster home to foster home, orphanage to orphanage, until he was finally adopted and brought to America. It was here in America that he realized what freedom was. And he's taken our skills, he's taken our trainings, and he's out there right now in South Dakota, and he's fortifying freedom. Another story from Alaska. This last week, my weeks run together. Last week, I was in Alaska. On Tuesday night, I taught how to impact your legislature through public testimony. On Wednesday, let me get that straight. Wednesday, I taught that. Thursday, I taught how to motivate your friends and neighbors by telling your story. And on Friday and Saturday, we spent 10 hours and more, probably 11 hours, on two of the most beautiful Alaska days I've ever seen inside, learning the skills to make change. And all 4 days, there was a man there. And I talked to him one day, and he said to me, I was talking to some friends of mine, Dwayne, and they said that they were thinking about giving up on the freedom movement. And I nodded, because we've all got friends like that, right? We've all got people who are just tired. And I said to him, well, what'd you say to him? He said, I looked at them, and I said, you know, my grandmother fought for our civil rights back in the 1960s. And while she was fighting for civil rights, she received a personal handwritten letter from the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan in South Carolina, threatening her life if she didn't stop what she was doing. I looked at my friends and I said, who's threatening our lives? There's nobody threatening our lives, so why are you giving up? Now's not the time to give up. He's out there fortifying freedom right now. Another story, this time from New Hampshire. I sat and watched and listened to Tony. Tony was an elderly man. I didn't even notice him in the back of the class. I was there teaching storytelling. And usually when I teach storytelling, there comes a point in the class where I have to ask for volunteers and no one volunteers. So then I have to ask, well, who in your group should tell their story? And everybody points to the person who reluctantly stands. And I said, so who wants to tell their story? And everybody at Tony's table said, Tony, you need to stand up and tell your story. And Tony stood up and talked about being a young man serving in the army in West Germany. And he said, during that time, the dictator in Czechoslovakia was loosening things up, and he was allowing transit across the border. And there was a person who worked on his base who was an expatriate from Czechoslovakia. And he and another friend of his went over to Czechoslovakia because he was very proud of his country and he wanted people to see it. He said when he came back, he said it was the same thing everywhere they went. They were driving a big American car, and when they'd pull into town, the car would get surrounded almost immediately because they knew they weren't from Czechoslovakia. And they'd surround the car and they'd ask them questions like, what's it like to be in America and be free? What's it like to go to the grocery store and actually have things on the shelves? What's it like not to be afraid? Everywhere they went, they got these same questions. It wasn't long after that this ended. Tony said he was watching the radar, and it was like a bunch of locusts on the radar heading towards Czechoslovakia, and they were being invaded. And he said we were listening to clandestine radio while this was happening. And he choked up. He choked up in this class, and he's got tears in his eyes, and he says, I listened to clandestine radio, and they were crying out for the Americans to come and help them, and there was nothing he could do. And he stood there for a minute, and he wiped his eyes, and he looked up, and he said, and that's why I will never stop fighting for freedom in America. And he's out there right now fortifying freedom. So I want to leave you with this. Many of you today heard a lot of good speakers, maybe learned a few things, and many of you tomorrow will hear a lot of good speakers, perhaps at room 502 starting at 10:45. You can come and hear how to make the moral case for capitalism, which, as we know, we need to be able to do. My challenge to you is, what are you going to do with it all? Because what good is knowledge if there's no action? We can sit and we can listen to speeches, and we can sit and we can listen to breakout sessions, but if we do nothing with it, how are we fortifying freedom? What good is knowledge if there's no action? I will be here all day tomorrow, and if any of you want to come and talk to me about setting something up or getting some classes, I'm happy to talk with you, because this isn't about you or me. It's about my 8 kids at home. It's about all our kids and grandchildren at home. It's about fortifying their freedom. Thank you.
Please welcome Justin Short, Colorado Christian University student.
I do not need to remind anyone of what happened a few months ago in Parkland, Florida. That tragedy shocked the nation and energized many young people to enter the public square and make their opinions heard. Our next speaker is one of those young people. Kyle Kashev is a survivor of that horrible shooting at Stoneman Douglas High School. He has since finished his junior year as top of his class and has become known as a staunch defender of Second Amendment rights. Engaging opposition like Piers Morgan or in the back alleys of Twitter, his bold and tactful approach has attracted the mentorship and friendship of Ben Shapiro and Charlie Kirk and other giants of conservatism. Charlie Kirk recognized Kyle's skill and named him the new director of high school outreach for Turning Point USA. Turning Point USA is an organization dedicated to equipping and educating young people to defend constitutional liberty. No doubt Kyle's impact will be felt as we welcome new waves of young conservatives dedicated to the cause of liberty. So, conservatives, please help me welcome to the stage Kyle Kashev.
Please welcome Kyle Cashew, survivor of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School shooting.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hunt and the Western Conservative Summit for hosting me tonight. Because I'm a 17-year-old and I haven't accomplished nearly as much as the other speakers today, I'd like to give you a little bit backstory about me. I'm a junior at Stoneman Douglas, the shooting that occurred February 14th. During that day, I was in my 4th period class, just sitting there, when the shots rang in the other building. We immediately ran out in the hallways, and we heard more shots pop. We then ran back into the classroom and sat in the dark for 2 hours straight until SWAT took us out. Immediately after, the left mobilized to denounce the Second Amendment and vilify gun owners, but I wasn't going to let that stand. Because of that, I made sure to do everything in my power to protect the Second Amendment. That's why I'm here today. Present-day society, we're detached from reality. We're always on our phones and we don't have the time to connect with each other. And that also leads us to not really care about school shootings. We've become desensitized to it. That's not okay. Your being at this conference is a symbol of your unparalleled love for the foundational elements on which our country was founded on. One of those fundamental beliefs is the Second Amendment. And at Turning Point USA, we're making sure to energize young activists to go out at their high schools and their colleges and to show their support for the Second Amendment while mobilizing the conservative base. We're making the leaders of tomorrow. And that's why on July 24th and 26th, we're hosting the High School Leadership Summit with huge name speakers such as Jesse Waters, Michael Knowles, and Anthony Scaramucci to talk there. The Second Amendment provides us the right to defend ourselves, and even more importantly, it poses a deterrent for a tyrannical government. Because we all know the first thing a tyrannical government does is it takes away the rights to bear arms for its citizens. This happened in Romania, in communist China, and most recently, Venezuela. We've seen this. And we've seen that the only way that we can ensure and protect the safety of our constituents is to have the Second Amendment. But here's the difference between America and every other nation. We have the essential liberty of the Second Amendment. And another thing that comes with that is our rightful mistrust of the government and our emphasis on self-preservation. Here's what happened at my school. Immediately after, the left mobilized and used this beneficial opportunity to push for gun control. They didn't waste a single second at all. The left, the mainstream media, and celebrities came out from everywhere, at every single corner, to push for gun control. Even more so, every single person knows the name of David Hogg and Emma Gonzalez, but you cannot name a single survivor of Santa Fe. There's a reason to that. It's because the left doesn't really care about school shootings. They care about using any opportunity to push for gun control, even though it's so illogical. But here are the facts about gun control. We have to know this so that we can make sure that we can properly argue and show the facts and to push for the proper policy. There are 36,000 gun deaths every year. 2/3 of those are suicides. The remaining 1/3 are homicides, in which gang activity constitutes a majority of that. But assault rifles only make up 3% of all gun deaths. Only 3%. And deaths by assault rifle, not by suicide, are 1% of all gun deaths. So banning assault rifles such as the AR-15 won't even do a dent to the overall gun crime that we have in the United States. Even the CDC, which is such a partisan hack, says there is an annual defensive use of guns between 500,000 and 3 million per year. Imagine that. So many more lives are saved by guns every year than are actually taken. And that's the difference between the right and the left. We view a gun as just an inanimate object, and that's what it is. But the left vilifies guns and gun ownership to an extent that is almost labels us as criminals, and that's wrong. Because law-abiding gun owners are one of the essential core of our nation. We believe that we should be able to defend ourselves because we don't trust the government. What's ironic is that the left wants to give away more of our rights to a government that is incompetent. So let's make America knowledgeable again. Here's what the left is entirely hypocritical about. Our courtrooms are protected by guns. Our airports are protected by guns. Our elected officials, yes, Democrats, are protected by guns. But you know who aren't protected by guns? Our children at our schools, because of gun-free zones. So we have to make sure that the first thing we do is get rid of gun-free zones. The only way to stop school shootings is to make sure we have a good guy with a gun to stop a bad guy with a gun. And we have to make sure that our children are safe again. All gun-free zones do is illuminate a target for a potential shooter and entices them to come in, because they know that when they go to a school that has a blaring sign that says gun-free zone, they're not going to encounter any armed opposition. Because here, let's listen to some facts about this. In most school shooting incidents, when the shooter is confronted by another armed individual, they either flee or are killed in 98% of cases. But that's why shooters love gun-free zones. They love it so much because they know that when they get into that school, there will be no one who can stop them. Make America free of gun-free zones. So here are the facts about shootings in schools, okay? The first shots are fired, on average. All the shots are fired in the first 5 minutes. But the average response time to a school by the police department is 15 minutes. That means that there are a total of 15 minutes in which students can do absolutely nothing in these classrooms because there is no armed individual on the campus due to gun-free zones. So they sit there for 15 minutes at the mercy of an animal, okay? Because leftists want to make sure that we have gun-free zones. We have to make sure that there are properly trained individuals. They can be police, they can be resource officers, they can be even teachers who have the ability to defend themselves. We need to make sure that there is an armed individual capable of taking down a shooter at every single school, because first responders are the ones who actually save lives. They're the ones who make sure and confront the shooter immediately, saving countless lives. We've seen this in many cases that go unreported due to the mainstream media not using it to push for gun control. We have to make our schools secure again, and here's how we do that. On a federal level, we can push for programs such as the Stop School Violence Act, which gave its first grant yesterday by Jeff Sessions. We're implementing actual policy change to secure our schools, and we're making it happen. But in reality, school safety is a state's matter. States have to be the one who create tailored policy to defend their schools. Including into that tailored policy, there have to be an end to gun-free zones, and we have to make sure that there are once again armed individuals on campus. The most important other legislation is making sure that we have single point entry at every single school. It only makes sense. At TSA, in our courtrooms, we have x-ray scanners and we have armed security who check every single baggage or every single piece that goes into that location. It's absolutely asinine that our youth are not as protected as our courtrooms or as our airports. The youth are the most important aspect of our society. And that's why at Turning Point, we're creating the next generation of activists. We have to make sure that we have mandatory school drills, and we have to make sure that we are hardening our schools to the extent that it is absolutely impossible for a school shooter to wreak havoc. We have to harden our targets, and by doing so, we are deterring school shooters, because there's one thing that a shooter loves. It's an unarmed target. We have to make sure that, in addition, we have to get rid of programs such as the Promise program, which recycle criminals back into our school system in order to synthetically reduce crime in order for schools to get more money by the federal government. That happened at my school. The shooter was in this Promise program, and he got recycled back into the school even though they knew he was a threat. This was listed by countless individuals at my school who knew who this kid was, who knew that he was a threat, who knew that he was an active possible shooter threat, and did absolutely nothing because by the Promise program, they have to just be quiet and put it back in the system in order to make it seem like crime is on the decline. We have to make sure that we hold our incompetent government accountable. What happened at my school was absolutely reprehensible. There were 78 tips to the Broward Sheriff's Officer. I call them the cowards of Broward because they stood idly by and did nothing and let my peers die. There were 2 tips to the FBI, 2 tips, and nothing was done. The Child Protective Services did absolutely nothing. And even more so, the school has 4 huge boxes of records and reports on this kid, and nothing has been done. But there's more to that. In order to make sure our schools are secure again, it's up to us. It's up to the communities who we have such an essential responsibility to root out that corruption and incompetence. We have to hold the school board and police departments accountable. We have to make sure state policy is implemented. And we have to absolutely make sure that our kids are secure. But there's a second aspect to that. We have to make sure that we hold on to our Second Amendment rights. The Second Amendment goes absolutely hand in hand with school safety. In addition, we can't sit idly by. The responsibility of school safety is in every single one of us. It's our legislators, but it's us who force our legislators to actually do something. We the people, it's our responsibility to make sure that our children are safe. And that's why I've been active in the political sphere, endorsing and campaigning for politicians who will make sure this will happen. It's up to us to fight for tomorrow by the elections of today. And this starts with electing Austin Peterson, Ron DeSantis, and Nick Freitas. We have to make sure to make America safe again. Thank you very much. How you doing, buddy?
One more time, please welcome Jeff Hunt, the chairman of the Western Conservative Summit.
Friends, could you imagine if your classmates were anti-Second Amendment and the entire national media launched onto them and elevated them and demonized you? Would you be strong enough to stand for your Second Amendment rights like Kyle has? I'm very proud of Kyle Kashuv, very proud of him. Friends, we started this evening with 2 World War II veterans who risked their lives to protect the freedoms that we enjoy. And tonight, we finished with a 14-year-old and a 17-year-old passionately arguing for the founding principles of this nation. Friends, that is conservatism right there. I'm very proud for the future of this country. And tomorrow we're going to have a lot of fun. So friends, while we wrap tonight, please go visit the exhibit hall. Check out our sponsors there and our exhibitors. Vote in the straw poll. And then tomorrow morning, be right back here at 8:30. We have a very special guest that's not on the schedule. During the first session tomorrow morning, we're going to hear from Jack Phillips, the baker here in Colorado. So be right back here tomorrow morning, okay? Have a wonderful night. Thank you for a great first day at the Western Conservative Summit. We'll see you at 8:30 tomorrow morning. God bless you.